Hello and welcome to the second video of the Arabian VACC S2 training Tier 1 endorsement for Dubai International Airport for air traffic controllers aspiring to control on the VATSIM network at Dubai International. So, welcome to video number 2. It's me again, Shazin, and let's continue from where we picked off, or rather, let's continue from where we stopped last time. I'm not sure why I didn't get that wording right that time. But anyway, so this one's going to be, again, a little bit more simple. Not really diving into anything too complex just yet. We're going to talk a little bit about the AOR, areas of responsibility. So again, from before, you must have seen this diagram. You must have seen it from your own sort of browsing. Also, just so we're clear, I haven't really mentioned this last time, but this is a little gremlin that I see some students get confused with, not all of them, but sometimes. Let's not forget that this sort of view isn't actually north. North is sort of slightly askew like this. I mean, if you kind of look like that, this is the way the airport is laid out, and if you just sort of bring that here, now you now have this sort of thing. I have had questions, well, why not just do it the way it's supposed to, quote unquote? Well, if you think about that, then you can imagine sort of if you have your airfield here on your radar screen, and if you're trying to zoom in, and you can see if you try and get more detail here, you have a lot of wasted space here, and then the vice versa happens if you try and sort of zoom in into a certain area here. I hope this makes sense. I mean, this should really be intuitive. As you can see, you have a lot of detail here, but you have all this wasted space here. Whereas if you kind of look at this in a rectangular screen, which is obviously what we've got on our computer screens, we've got all the detail that we need without sort of wasting too much space. Obviously, we might question this a little bit here, but that's literally just the shape of the airport, really, if you think about it. We have everything that we need here. So yeah, that's one little thing out of the way. The second one, I'm going to talk about the AOR a little bit. Before I do that, I am going to sort of put an asterisk. This will apply to the rest of the training series. I will primarily bias my training in the 3 zeros configuration. This is something I always do with my students because it's the preferred configuration at Dubai. Now, when I say preferred, obviously, you know, what determines the runway configuration, right? You can think about the headwind component. So weather, basically. You can think about operational reasons. Obviously, in real life as well, it's more relevant as to why a certain configuration might be more beneficial than the other to cater to, you know, how big or small your airspace is and what you sort of have to work with and how that interacts with where most of your traffic comes from and all kinds of stuff. Not really important to dive into now. Just sort of accept that 3 zeros is the preferred configuration that we have in Dubai, and even if, you know, we have reasons not to use 3 zeros, for example, we talked about the headwind component. What if it's a tailwind component? What if you have winds coming in from here? We would still try and use 3 zeros up to, if you break this down, a 5 knot tailwind component. So obviously, the more sort of directional to, you know, the opposite of 3 zero it is, then obviously your tailwind component increases drastically. It's probably going to be more than 5. But you could also have the case of, you know, this alone could be, I don't know, 7. But if you actually split the vector, it might not actually have to necessarily be 5. So this might be like around 4 or something. Anyway, the point being, we stick to the 3 zeros as much as we can. And the second problem is when you then eventually switch to 1-2s, a lot of things change. The way things talk to each other changes. The way a lot of the fundamentals set in stone, such as, again, here, AOR, a lot of it changes. And for the purposes of training, for me, it's really not worth diving into having to repeat myself a second time. It's really not worth it. So the way I've always taught my students, and found success anyway, from doing that is to sort of stick to the configuration that we use most of the time, about 80% of the time, and sort of let them learn, let them make mistakes, let them accumulate the skills and the tools needed to understand why things are the way they are, and to then sort of apply themselves and understand why things are the way they are, and then understand, okay, if I now suddenly switch the thing to 1-2s, if I think about those philosophies or the fundamentals and how they should interact, then they look through the 1-2 stuff and it's like, okay, this makes sense. As opposed to just sort of teaching one by one, okay, you, in 3-0s you do this, and 1-2s you do that. So just a little asterisk here. So this applies to the rest of the training. I will primarily focus on the 3-0s. And again, it comes back to what I said. This is really just a sort of supplement to your training tools, whatever it is that you're using, your charts, actual mentoring sessions, whatever. Now, this is not meant to be a substitute. This is just a training aid for your theoretical knowledge. So anyway, let's talk a little bit about the AOR. This should be pretty short and simple. We talked about it last time as well. So again, understand that we have 2 tower positions, as you can see, tower 1, tower 2, air 1, air 2, tower north, tower south, whatever you want to call it, as per the official designations, whatever. And you have responsibility over different parts of the aerodrome, depending on who you are, including certain parts of the airport's taxiways, as you can see here. All this stuff here. This little business. Why is that? Turns out it has its reasons. Just like how this has its reasons. Where, okay, well, if aircraft are lining up for departure here, why is it that I have to talk to them all the way back here? And in fact, ground controllers would have to think about handing them off pretty early, such that by here, this is their sort of reminder to hand off, and all of a sudden, here is where aircraft come to this frequency. Speaking of frequencies, by the way, you should kind of be knowing this from, you know, your experience, from your charts, from understanding your controller clients, whatever, but for what it's worth, this is 118.750, and this is 119er decimal 550. So yeah, what's the deal there? In addition to, you know, all the other stuff to think about, such as holding points. Why do we only use certain holding points? Why not use all of them? How do these things interact with each other? It's pretty intricate. So that's something to think about, and it's a brilliant segue to perhaps the favorite part of my theory teaching when it comes to S2, separation. A lot of what is sort of built on the architecture of how things are, including things like why this little bit has to be this far out when really it might make sense to you, okay, vacate the runway and then immediately contact ground. No, in fact, they stay with tower all the way here. This is a pretty long taxi. This could take up to 3 minutes of taxi time for most folks on VATSIM. Probably more than that. Certainly here as well. Going from Mike to here, especially if you have traffic, that's a pretty long taxi. Turns out this is built to cater to the architecture of how separation and separation techniques as a tower controller are set in stone. It's quite fascinating, and that's a brilliant segue to our next video, which is, again, stay tuned, because this is where a lot of new nuggets of information are going to be thrown at you. So, yeah.